Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where we demystify complex technologies every day and provide real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping entire industries. But we do all this in a language that everyone can understand. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure if the Earth is spinning faster on its axis or I'm just getting old, but it seems that time is just flying by. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years. And can you believe 4 years have passed since GDPR arrived? But what's changed since its inception? What is the best way forwards for companies to navigate that complexity? Data subject access requests, right of access, and how can they protect against threats such as ransomcloud? These are just a few of the areas that Dave Horton from Odor Saver is going to discuss with me today. And I don't want to reveal any spoilers. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears directly into our conversation here in the UK, where we'll talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Horton. I lead the solutions engineering team for a company called Odaseva. We work in the Salesforce ecosystem, and we're one of the few vendors on the market that will help actually back up, retrieve, archive data. We also help with data protection issues, as well as helping customers with data agility. So being able to take production data, anonymize it, send it onto Sandbox to do secure testing with. So my team specifically, we actually help customers when it comes to evaluating our solution. Can it do everything that they need it to do? Sometimes we get some very wild use cases, and so our team kind of consumes those use cases and sees, well, how can we make a round peg fit in a square hole when it comes to some of these Salesforce foibles when it comes to data management.
And I'm curious, if I was to take you back in time before all of this, can you remember where your passion for technology came from, or just a moment that might have played a big part in putting you on this path you're on today?
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, probably similar to a lot of people my age, it started very early on. In the late 80s, I was quite fortunate to have a Commodore 64, and then we had the first personal computers in the house, which was really good fun. So I remember playing with computers, the actual nuts and bolts of them from a very early age, and using technology really has kind of primed my career, I guess, in terms of understanding how to technically make something work and taking a business challenge and making technology be the enabler to make it happen. So, very early on, I think nowadays it's a lot different. I don't think anybody tinkers with computers the way they used to, but certainly that's where it started for me.
And, in over 2,100 interviews, the most common answer I get to that question, or it's mentioned at least once, is the Commodore 64. Who would have thought the power that 64K machine would deliver?
Absolutely.
And of course, it was that path that would lead you to Odor Saver, so which I believe was built specifically to help Salesforce customers keep their data protected, compliant and agile. But can you tell me more about the story behind the company and the initial problems that you set out to solve with tech?
Yeah, absolutely. So our founder and CEO, So Van Bin, he was one of the first certified technical architects with Salesforce, and he was working with Salesforce's largest customers on some of their CRM challenges. And so, one of them was, there was a big move towards SaaS-based cloud computing. Obviously, prior to that, everything was on-premise, and it was very easy to control. But with the move to the cloud and SaaS, the challenge for many customers is, well, it's great that we've got our data in the cloud. It means that we can be more agile. We can access it from anywhere. We don't have to factor in the upfront cost for the hardware and software. It's very convenient. There's more security in SaaS than typically there was in on-premise setups. But the counter argument is, well, you're trusting your SaaS vendor to store and secure that data. It's their hardware, it's their software that you're essentially leveraging. And the biggest challenge is with the emphasis that people place on the value of Salesforce data specifically. So if you imagine it's the lifeblood of many organizations, is CRM, like what interactions have we had with customers, what products are selling well, which aren't selling well, for example. Some of this is incredibly important to our customers. And to not have a backup solution, not be able to kind of roll back if there's been any kind of data issues or data events, is a significant risk to large organizations. So we're really a product that is born out of needing that insurance essentially on your important data in SaaS. So many of our customers will choose a solution like Odaseva because we have a very secure solution. We're prided in being the number one in the security space for the actual kind of locking down of that data, making sure no one can access it, making sure it's encrypted with the customer's key, so only they can access it. We're a no-view provider in that instance. But equally, we're giving them that ability to have an undo button in Salesforce, something that doesn't exist today natively.
And of course, here in Europe, this is the year that it's the 4th anniversary of GDPR. So I'm curious, from your point of view, what has changed since its inception?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I was very fortunate in my previous roles. I've worked for a number of startups prior to working for Odaseva, and one of them was a pioneer in the privacy management space. And so one of the interesting factors was in around about kind of 2016, 2017, I joined a company called OneTrust. And, we were actually selling the first technology solutions that would help with privacy. And early days, I worked with a lot of very large customers, people with household names. And we go and talk to them about some of the challenges that they're going to have with the adoption of GDPR. And, you can imagine a lot of people would just bring us in for a bit of education. They would be very much tell us what we should be doing. And then it's great that you've got some software, but we're also quite interested in, hearing what other companies are doing via your company. And so the biggest thing that's changed is every company now has a thread through it that is really looking at how they consume data, how data is being used, where they store that information. I can't tell you how many financial services organizations, for example, that I spoke to that had never ever deleted a record in their CRM, or never ever deleted a record on employees, for example. And with GDPR, there are certain elements there that means that unless you've got a very good reason to continue to store and process personal data, then you're opening yourself up for potential regulatory fines and certainly some harsh questioning around the business practice. So I think the biggest change has been actually how companies have responded and how people consider and treat data. I think the education is that much stronger now. That it is at the forefront of most businesses when they're looking at new systems that are going to store and process personal data.
And I think it is that threat and the complexity of everything that is, well, I've seen a few US websites that find it easy just to completely refuse to serve users outside of the US with content, and you just get that, sorry, we're not serving you in your region at the moment, which can be quite frustrating if you're researching something. But what is the best way forward for companies to navigate that complexity?
I think, the reason that many of these US websites, they went down that path was, they didn't really have anything in the US, and maybe they're a US newspaper site, for example. And, rather than comply, they were like, well, we've only got a couple of thousand, readers from Europe and the rest of the world. It'd be easier for us to just throw up a banner that would detect based on IP address where they're coming from and just blanket, remove that from being our issue. And in some regards, that is quite wise. I'm removing a threat or a risk that I have of enforcement, even though it's not in my jurisdiction. So in some ways, it's like every decision a company makes, there is a seesaw between what I'd like to do and what I'm allowed to do. And so, many companies will take a similar tact when it comes to anything, when it comes to IT risk management. But certainly when it comes to, the complexity, it's not slowed down at all. GDPR was really a catalyst for many of the privacy frameworks to be, born, essentially. So we've seen not just GDPR, but the CCPA in California and now the CPRA. Each US state has brought online or is in the process of bringing online their own states' laws when it comes to data privacy. Many of the jurisdictions outside of Europe, for example, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, we've got a lot of new regulations. And the good thing is that many of them have taken GDPR as a bit of a blueprint, and they've kind of kept the fundamentals of GDPR. So when it comes to complexity, I think you stand pretty well if you just accept that GDPR is the blueprints for your company, and then you can make very specific changes when it comes to other jurisdictions outside of Europe. So I think although there wasn't initially a lot of complexity, and there was a lot of kind of knee-jerk reactions to how do we handle European citizens' data, I think with that maturity has come companies now looking at having a baseline when it comes to their privacy policy internally.
And of course, another big topic right now is ransomcloud. So can you tell the listeners a little bit more about that if they are hearing about it for the first time, and a little bit more about attackers' techniques, which organizations are possibly most at risk from this too?
Yeah, I mean, ransomcloud is very similar to ransomware. Essentially,
Yeah.
You essentially are in a situation where you've got data, you can read it, and then all of a sudden one day an attacker or a malicious actor has managed to access your data, encrypt it so that even you can't view it, and then they'll have some kind of technique whereby you assign some funds to them, either through cryptocurrency or other means, to actually allow you to then unencrypt their data. So you're literally holding that data to ransom. Ransomcloud to me is really where you extend this to SaaS. So if I am storing data in a third-party vendor's repository, Ransomcloud is really, well, that data has been encrypted, and you're under threat of never being able to access that data ever again unless you provide funds to that malicious actor. And the interesting thing about this way of attacking a company is that very, very much, or a lot of the time, people aren't necessarily going to broadcast the fact that they've had these issues. If they've had some kind of ransomware or ransomcloud attack, it's quite embarrassing for many security companies within these organizations to admit to the fact that they've had to pay out, for example. So the true impact of how big that business is and how much money is actually being generated by these malicious actors is largely unknown. It's very difficult to quantify, but it's certainly something that our customers are thinking about. By having backup that is encrypted, it means that even if you do have your primary data source encrypted across the board by a malicious actor, and they're making threats, at least you've got the backup of that data, and you can kind of keep some kind of primary copy offsite off that SaaS platform.
And the big question is, especially for any business leaders or decision makers listening, how can organizations better protect themselves, would you say?
I think it always starts with mapping your data. The best thing that a company can do is really understand, well, where is it that I'm storing personally identifiable information? Where am I storing business sensitive information? And by having this asset map of like what data are we storing, what is the purpose, it doesn't only help you with the data privacy requirement, but it also helps you understand, well, where should we be securing or where should we be investing in security to make sure that we don't run into issues later on down the line. So if you do have repositories that are storing particularly sensitive information, and it's maybe underinvested when it comes to the security that's protecting that, well, if you're aware of it, then you can build a roadmap for strengthening the security. Or, one of the best things that came out of GDPR was, speaking to companies, and they do an asset map or a data map of all of their data in a company. The best thing that came out of that was, okay, we've got 10 copies of the same data. How about we consolidate that into one, shut the other 9 down, and then increase the strength of the security on that primary? It was really a hidden benefit for GDPR, was the mapping process actually really helped companies to make a mature assessment of all of the assets that they had in their company.
And of course, we're all living in the age of the API now to make sense and connect everything together. So I've got to ask, what are the biggest API challenges that you're seeing out there? And by that, I mean, especially around backing up SaaS data, particularly in Salesforce, for example, and how they can be overcome, those kind of challenges.
Yeah, I mean, APIs are, or application program interface, essentially it's a way that you can connect to systems together. So our customers, or certainly Salesforce's customers, the way that they would use APIs is to essentially stand up a interesting piece of technology, maybe some new AI or reporting function. Maybe there's some car payment information that you want to transfer into Salesforce. And so the logical way to do this is to connect via that API. And so Salesforce has been developed really from the ground up as a SaaS solution, and APIs are really fundamental to integrating into SaaS. Now, the biggest problem that companies have is, well, if we take Salesforce, for example, they've not just got one application. They've been making acquisitions, they've been rolling other products, they've been releasing new features. And I would imagine, having not worked for Salesforce, but I would imagine that all of this is sitting on different technology on the back end. So there's different application services written in different languages. There's different database components hosted on different database providers. It would be a mess. And so the APIs do actually give a bit of harmony to how you would connect to Salesforce, regardless of the cloud or the application that you're connecting with. Now, the challenge when it comes to backup specifically is that because of this back end mess that we see in the Salesforce ecosystem, it means that the only way that you can legitimately back up your data is actually by using the APIs themselves. And so essentially what we're doing is we're doing a ton of get commands to essentially query all of the data out of Salesforce in a very structured and mannered way. But essentially, if we do a restore, we're just pushing that information back in or putting that information back in. So it's all through the application interface. And so the big challenge is that commercially, Salesforce actually only give companies a certain number of API calls per day. So the impact here is that you could easily overconsume if you chose the wrong backup vendor, for example. Or if you had another application tie into those APIs and they overconsume the APIs, it would break down or take out all of the other applications that were also connected to Salesforce. So one of the things that we help customers with is actually understand, well, what is your governor limit, which is the hard cap that Salesforce puts in your org? What is that for you? because you can pay more if you wish to get more APIs, but you ultimately want to get the most cost-effective route. But we can monitor that over time, so we can see, well, day on day, you're actually increasing the amount of API calls that you make into Salesforce, and so we can actually make people aware of that. In our backup solution, we can actually put hard caps. So we do a check before we do any kind of backup or restore activity. And we'll actually ask Salesforce, what is the API limit for the day? And have we consumed more than 50% of that across the board? And so we can make decisions whether or not we halt on certain processes that are going to be API heavy to save the rest of the environment. And this isn't something that every vendor on the market does. So it's slowly becoming more of a compelling component of our platform.
And we've seen quite a few changes over the last few years, and things that immediately spring to mind is the emergence of digital nomads now, where employees can work anywhere in the world as long as they've got a Wi-Fi connection. And unfortunately, we're also seeing a rising global conflict. And I think as a result, businesses now have a heightened awareness of where their data is stored, what countries can access it, etc. So can you tell me more about how residency as a service is actually helping organizations navigate those complex and evolving data residency laws, especially with things like the PIPL in China?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess the interesting kind of balance I think that we've seen is that as we're going more cloud, as we've pushed more of our data towards, a data center someone else is hosting for us. Before, it was actually a lot easier for you to know exactly where that data was going to live because it was literally within your four walls of your business. When we moved to cloud, the irony is that the data protection laws probably would have made a lot more sense in the past than they do in a cloud-first type in ecosystem. And, it's a big challenge. If you look at, some of Salesforce's largest customers, they account for, some of the biggest companies in the world that span multiple geographies. And, it's still a SaaS solution. So it's a single region that you would store that data in. So if you've got data subjects in Europe or consumers in the US, and you've got other countries in Asia Pacific, for example, also kind of a key component of your CRM data, where to host that information is incredibly difficult from a legislative perspective. Like, where should we store that data that it would meet those criteria? So, the challenge is already there. What has made this even worse for companies is that, certainly some of the emphasis on GDPR, some of the negative press about the GDPR when it was coming into force was actually that it was a bit of a stimulus package for the European Union. And what I mean by that is, having the requirement that the data had to sit in a particular country, you had to employ a European citizen to be the data protection officer, for example. It was a bit of a kind of Cold War effort when it comes to keeping a digital presence in Europe. And so many of the other privacy laws have kind of taken that to heart as well. So if you look at Russia or China, there is an aspect where the data subject information has to sit within that country. So if I'm using a solution like Salesforce, well, how do I store that information in China if my Salesforce instance is in Europe, for example? So this is really where residency as a service can use technology to get around some of these regulatory issues. So one solution that we're working on is the ability to redact or encrypt field level information. So if we flag that, I'm in China, I enter in some Chinese person's personal data, we would encrypt that information so that if I was accessing that same data from the US or from Europe, I can only see ciphertext. I can't actually see who that person is, what their personal information is in CRM. But if I'm accessing it from China, then I can see that information. And then we can repeat that for other jurisdictions. So again, Russia's got a very similar thing. If we store information in our CRM from Russia, then it's going to be encrypted. And so by building some technology around the data, we can take that interpretation of the law and say, well, actually, it is stored locally. We would actually encrypt that information, store it locally, but it's only accessible via the primary if I'm in that country. So there's a lot of complexity in kind of setting that kind of system up. But these are the ways that some of the most innovative companies that are using SaaS are kind of approaching this particular issue. That's only going to get more complex. I think as more privacy laws come online, I think it's really going to be a necessity to have a residency as a service for any of my SaaS offerings in the future.
And as you said, it is such a complex area, but I think you've done a fantastic job today of demystifying that, putting it in a language that everyone can understand. And we started the podcast talking about your origin story, what put you on this path. So as we now look back on your career, as we come full circle, can you share the funniest or most interesting story that has happened in your career? And we'll end the podcast on a high note there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been very fortunate. Some of the companies that I have worked with, early stage, they've often been at the forefront of a seismic shift in technology. So I used to work for a mobile device management platform called AirWatch, which was acquired by VMware. And so one of the interesting things about that was prior to that technology evolving, there wasn't really a good or easy way to get email on your personal device. There wasn't an easy way for you to enable a corporate device to access corporate information. And, one of the interesting things around working in in that sort of environment was that you often go and speak to companies that are considering a security solution, and they're kind of asking you about the market, and you're kind of educating them. Sometimes they say, yes, we want this product. And sometimes they say, no, we don't want this product. And so I think one of the more interesting aspects, and I won't name any names, but, when those companies have data breaches and it was of an origin of a mobile device, for example, it's always quite interesting to connect that meeting where we did a brilliant job of kind of positioning the platform, the problem, the solution, but they still didn't go for it, whether that was a budgetary thing or, whether they had some other priorities. But it's always very interesting to kind of see that kind of come up in the headlines. And very similar, when I was working in the privacy sector, again, I won't name any names, but working with some companies that maybe didn't have the strongest reputation when it came to data privacy, a couple of years ago, working with those companies before it became headline news, it really is quite interesting to kind of look back at some of those conversations and some of those seismic shifts in technology and some of the solutions I work with, and see, well, how does it actually marry up to, issues that have cropped up for those companies later on. So I always find that quite interesting because it's something I can't really talk about, but I often think back at some of the companies I have spoken to, and just wonder how that could have been different had they gone the route that we were trying to persuade them to go.
Oh, I love that. And before I let you go, for anyone listening who would like to dive a little bit deeper into anything that we talked about today or find out more information about Odor Saver, what's the best starting point for everything?
So I'd say that our website is a really good resource for just understanding some of our specific use cases and how we can solve data management issues when it comes to Salesforce. We are very present on LinkedIn as well. So we do have an all-star team. Our company is actually spread through, I believe, around 10 different countries. We've got staff located. So, whatever language, whatever region, I think we do have a solution. People very willing to have a conversation about some of your data challenges.
Well, here we are on the year of the GDPR anniversary, and I can't thank you enough, Dave, for coming on here and talking about what's changed since the GDPR or the inception of GDPR, the best way forward for companies to navigate that kind of complexity, especially around data subject access rights, right of access, and also threats of ransomcloud too. We've done all that in a language everyone can understand, and also washed down with your very personal origin story too, and maybe a little hint of a Commodore 64 in there. But thank Thank you so much, Dave.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
I think we covered so much there in a short amount of time. And with the increased regulation and uncertainty in the world at the moment, I think it's a topic that should resonate with every business, no matter what industry, no matter where you're located in the world. So how are you overcoming these challenges? Did anything resonate with what Dave was talking about today? Do you have a different approach? Is there anything you'd like to share? Or would you like to come on the podcast? Whatever it is, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes, and we'll keep this conversation going together. I always like to finish every episode by saying technology works best when it brings people together. And the fact that you tune in every single day further proves that point. So I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.